Hello dear students, I hope you are doing well and are safe and healthy. Today we are starting chapter number 3, Democracy and Diversity of your book Democratic Politics Part 2. I am sure you have heard both these terms, democracy and diversity, many a times since class 6th. In the previous chapter, Federalism, we saw how power can be distributed to accommodate linguistic and regional diversities. It was done by making new states and our language policy. But language and region are not the only features that give a distinct identity to people. Sometimes people also identify themselves and relate with others on the basis of their physical appearance, class, religion, gender, caste, tribe, etc. In this chapter, we will study first, how democracy responds to social differences, divisions and inequalities. We begin with an example of public expression of social divisions. Second, we will then study about how social differences can take various forms. And in the end, we will find out how democratic politics affects and is affected by these social diversities. I am sure you will be able to relate to many things that we will discuss today in this chapter, and you can see most of it around you. So, in today's session, we will be discussing about the public expression of social divisions and forms of social differences. Let us begin by listening to a story about Mexico Summer Olympics, which became one of the most politically charged Olympic Games. Mexico is in North America. During the medal ceremony of the 200 meters race, which was held in 1968 Olympics at Mexico City, two African American athletes, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, raised a black gloved fist during the playing of the US national anthem. This you can see here in the picture. This picture became one of the most iconic sports images of the 20th century. They had won the gold and bronze medals respectively. African American, Afro American, Black American or the blacks. These are the terms used to refer mainly to the descendants of Africans who were brought to America as slaves between the 17th century and early 19th century. The silver medalist, white Australian athlete Peter Norman, wore a human rights badge on his shirt during the ceremony to show his support to the two Americans. Norman supported his fellow Olympians' protest, in part because of the intolerance he had witnessed in Australia. He took part in the Black Power salute because of his opposition to racism and the white Australian policy. With this gesture, they all were trying to draw international attention to racial discrimination in the United States. The black gloved and raised clenched fist were meant to symbolize black power. The Black Power movement emerged in 1966 and lasted till 1975, which was a more militant anti-racist movement advocating even violence, if necessary, to end racism in the US. The pictures here depict an important landmark in the history of the civil rights movement in the United States. Civil rights movement in the USA that went on from 1954 to 1968 refers to a set of events and reform movements aimed at abolishing legal racial discrimination against African Americans. Led by Martin Luther King Jr., this movement practiced non-violent methods of civil disobedience against racially discriminatory laws and practices. Do you think that Carlos and Smith should have raised an internal matter of American society in an international forum? Would you say that what they did was political? Why do you think Peter Norman, who was neither black nor American, joined in the gesture of protest? What do you think must have happened to all three athletes? International Olympic Association held Carlos and Smith guilty of violating the Olympic spirit by making a political statement. Their medals were taken back. Back home, they were subjected to a lot of criticism. Norman too suffered for his action and was not included in the Australian team for the next Olympic. But they all succeeded in their mission. They were trying to draw international attention to racial discrimination in the United States, and they succeeded in gaining international attention for the civil rights movement in the US. Recently, the San Jose State University, of which they were former students, honored them and installed their statue in the university campus, as you can see here in the picture. When Norman died in 2006, Smith and Carlos were pallbearers at the funeral. Mexico Olympics was one of the ways of public expression of discrimination faced by Black Americans, and this event helped bring in the international limelight. Now let us discuss about another conversation between three people about discrimination and public expression. Some Dalit groups decided to participate in the UN Conference Against Racism in Durban in 2001, demanding the inclusion of caste in the agenda of this conference. So here are these three reasons to the move. Amandeep Kaur says, our constitution declares caste discrimination to be illegal. If some caste discrimination continues, it is an internal matter. I am opposed to this being raised in an international forum. Another person, Kirti, says, I am opposed to this because caste and race are not similar divisions. Caste is a social division, while race is a biological one. Raising caste in this conference on racism would mean equating the two. Third person, Ashok, says, who is a Dalit activist, the argument about internal matter is a way of preventing open discussion of oppression and discrimination. Race is not purely biological. It is as much a legal and sociological category as caste. Caste discrimination must be raised in this conference. Now, which of these three opinions do you agree with most and why? Take a moment and find out. What do you think? Out of these three people, whose opinion do you agree with most? To a great extent, I agree with the opinion of Ashok. In the name of internal matter, people should not be prevented from an open discussion of oppression and discrimination. Merely dividing race and caste in intellectual grounds does not check the mental agony that the deprived people are facing. If there is oppression and discrimination in the society, we cannot call ourselves a democratic nation. To avoid discussion is to oppress democracy. Instead, discussion can show us the way to eradicate all these practices and share happiness and sorrow with the deprived class equally. This is what the true democracy is meant for. Now, let us discuss how these differences originate. The story from the Mexico Olympics shows an example of social division and social inequalities. But in society, there are other forms of social divisions as well that exist. As you have learned in the previous two chapters, regional linguistic and religious differences have created social divisions. The examples of Belgium and Sri Lanka show both regional and social divisions. In the case of Belgium, we found linguistic differences. People who live in different regions speak different languages. In Sri Lanka, we noted linguistic as well as religious differences. Thus, social diversity can take different forms in different societies. But how do these differences occur? What makes one person different from the other? These social differences are mostly based on accident of birth. There are certain features that distinguish one from the other by birth. Normally, we don't choose to belong to our community. We belong to it simply because we were born into it. For example, people around us are male or female. They are tall or short, have different kinds of complexions, or have different physical abilities or disabilities. We ourselves have no control over these. Then there are some differences are based on our choices. For example, some people are atheist. They don't believe in God or any religion. Some people convert to another religion. There are several other choices we make, such as what to study, which occupation to take up, and which games or cultural activities to take part in. All these lead to formation of social groups that are based on our choices. We have a tendency to favor others who exhibit cultural or personality traits that match up with our own. This tendency is so strong that it often leads us to assume that people we like are more similar to us than they actually are. Knowing more about how these forces influence our perceptions can help us become more aware of and competent in regards to the impressions we form of others. Social differences divide similar people from one another, but they also unite very different people. People belonging to different social groups share differences and similarities cutting across the boundaries of their groups. We saw this in the above example of Mexico Olympics. Did you see that Carlos and Smith were similar in one way? That is, both were African American, and thus different from Norman because he was white. Between them, they were different because of the color of their skin. But they were all similar in other ways. Can you tell what is similar between them? Yes, that is right. First similarity was that they were all athletes. And second similarity was that they all stood against racial discrimination. So we can see that differences doesn't necessarily lead to division between people or society. From the above example, you can easily see that we all have more than one identity and can belong to more than one social group. We have different identities in different contexts. Let us discuss this in a little more detail. It is fairly common for people belonging to the same religion to feel that they do not belong to the same community because their caste or sect is very different. It is also possible for people from different religions to have the same caste and feel close to each other. Rich and poor persons from the same family often do not keep close relations with each other, for they feel they are very different. Now that we have seen how we all have multiple identities and each of us are different from others, let us discuss what role do these differences play in society and how these differences affect our society. Social differences imply a state when people are discriminated or one class or a group is given preference over the other due to the difference in their social, economic or racial inequality. Overlapping and cross-cutting are the two types of social differences. We will first discuss overlapping differences. Overlapping differences is the mixture of one or more differences caused by one main difference. When one kind of social difference becomes more important than the other and people start feeling that they belong to different communities, this is known as overlapping differences. One social difference reinforces the other difference. For example, in India, Dalit, which is a lower caste, have constantly been ignored by the upper caste and they tend to be poor and landless and often face injustice and discrimination. So, being a Dalit means he is more likely to be poor, landless, facing injustice and discrimination. Another example is racial difference between dark complexion and fairer complexion, also referred as the Afro-Americans in the US, becomes a social division because the darker complexion tend to stay unemployed due to their color and tend to be poor and homeless and often face injustice and discrimination. Their complexion leads them to poverty. So, one social difference of being black reinforces the other social difference of being poor. Situations of this kind produce social divisions when one kind of social difference becomes more important than the other and people start feeling that they belong to different communities. Social groups do not share any common interest on any issue. Overlapping social differences create possibilities of deep social divisions and tensions. Second form of difference found in the society is cross-cutting differences. If social differences cross-cut one another, it means that groups that share a common interest on one issue are likely to differ on a different issue. If social differences cross one another, it is difficult to pit one group of people against other. For example, in the Netherlands, class and religion tend to cross-cut each other. Catholics and Protestants are about equally likely to be poor or rich. The result is that Catholics and Protestants do not have conflict in the Netherlands, and therefore you will find that cross-cutting social differences are easier to accommodate and manage. We know till now that social divisions of one kind or another exist in most countries. It does not matter whether the country is small or big. India is a vast country with many communities. Belgium is a small country with many communities. But we know both have social divisions. Even those countries such as Germany and Sweden that were once highly homogeneous, which means similar kinds of people, especially with no significant ethnic differences, are undergoing rapid changes with influx of people from other parts of the world. Migrants bring with them their own culture and tend to form a different social community. In this sense, we can say that most countries of the world are multicultural and the society will have one or other kind of social divisions. So, dear students, with this we come to the end of first part of the chapter. Let us quickly recapitulate what we learned in today's session. After today, you must be able to realize that each and every society has people who are different from one another in one or other way, and this difference is either due to their birth in a particular family or community, or because of the choices that they have made regarding their education, job, religion, etc., etc. We saw that these differences do not necessarily mean division in society or between people, as we saw in the case of athletes in Mexico. We also learned about overlapping and cross-cutting differences and their effect on society. I hope you enjoyed today's session. I will end today's session with a small assignment for you. First question: differentiate between overlapping and cross-cutting differences. Question number 2: every social difference does not lead to social division. Justify the statement with relevant examples. Question number 3: explain the origin of social differences. Question number 4: when does a social difference become a social division? Please try to solve it, and I will see you in the next session. Thank you.